So in this part, we're going to be working on the question count and the answer count. So we've a lot to do, so let's get into it. So the question count is actually always going to be 1 because every DNS query has one question. If you read this RFC, there are parts of it where it talks about multiple questions in a DNS query, but in reality, that never happens. So every DNS query has one question, and then it can have multiple answers. So here what we're going to do, we're going to say question count, and that is going to be equal to QD count, which is the way it is written on the RFC. You can see it's called QD count, and that is equal to 2 bytes, and it's always going to be a 1, so it's going to be equal to a string of bytes, and that's going to be /x, which is how you create a hexadecimal number, and you say 00 for the first byte because you're allowed 2 bytes for question counts, but question count is always 1, so the first byte is always going to be 0, and the second byte is going to be 1, so it's 0, 1. So that's our question count done. The answer count is a bit more complicated. So the answer count will vary depending on how many answers you have in your zone files. So here we have a zone file. It's the zone file for howcode.org. If I click on this is the zone file. I'm going to put this up on GitHub so you can download it. The only relevant part of this to the series is the A record section. It's a JSON file because Python has built-in JSON processing. And here you can see for the howcode.org entry, we have 3 answers. So we're going to expect an answer count of equal to 3. So before we can get the answer count, we need to figure out what the actual domain name being queried is. So if we go back to Wireshark and I convert this into hexadecimal, you can see the domain we're trying to query is howcode.org. It's in the queries section and you can see it's howcode.org. So we need to extract this. So to do that, we need to understand the format of the domain name in the DNS request. So here I have a DNS reply. This is the hexadecimal data that you can see in Wireshark, and it's all color coded. So first there's the transaction ID, then there's the flags, then there's the questions. We've done these 3 parts already. Then we've got the answers, and that's the one we're working on at the minute. To get the answers, we need to figure out what the domain name of the query is, and this is down here, and this is in the orange. So the way DNS encodes domain names is you'll have the length of the label, which is what it's called. You have 7 characters, and then you have these 7 characters. So howcode is 7 characters long. Then you have 3 characters, and then you have org for org, which is another 3 characters. And then you have this 0 byte that tells DNS that that is the end of the domain name. So what we're going to do is we're going to just create a method called getQuestionDomain. And then we're going to pass it data. But we don't need to pass it the entire data because if we look here, you can see that this is our DNS header. We don't need to pass it the DNS header because the domain name only starts in the query section, which is after the header. The header is also always 12 bytes. So we can pass it data, and then we can say 12 colon to start in the 12th index, which is the 13th byte, which means that we are skipping all of this data above, and the first piece of data we're going to send is the actual domain name, which means we have less processing to do. So what we're going to do is go up here, and we're going to say def get question domain. We're going to pass it a variable called data, and what we're going to do is just print out data. Run our server, and you can see this is the data. We have the length of the string, then we have howcode, we have the length of org, then we have org, and then we have this other data here. This isn't part of the domain name. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a variable called state, and it's going to be equal to 0, and then what we're going to do is say 4 byte in data, which means we're looping through every single byte in the string of data. And what we want to do is create an if statement that says if state is equal to 1, then we're going to do something else. We're going to say state equals 1. So at the minute, state is equal to 0. So the first time it runs, state is going to be 0, which means we're going to run this else statement. So we're going to set state equal to 1 first, and then we're going to say expected length equals byte, because the first character in the string is the length of the label that we're going to get. So we're going to say that the expected length is equal to byte, and then up here we're going to say expected length is equal to 0 just to initialize it. So the second time it runs, we've got the length of the label that we expect, but then we have to get the first character. So we're going to create a variable called domain string, and it's going to be equal to an empty string. Then what we're going to do is if state is equal to 1, we're going to say domain string is equal to byte. But we need to convert byte into a character, because when we iterate over a string of bytes, we just get integers. So what we're going to do down here is just print domain string. We have a syntax error, just we need to make this a double equals. Run this again. And you can see we got howcode printed out, and then we got org printed out. And we don't want to set domain string equal to char, we want to append the character onto the string. So we run this one more time. and you can see we get howCode org. So that's great so far, but what we want to do is we want to split org and howCode up. So we want to create another variable called domain parts, and we want to set it equal to a list. And what we want to do is create another variable called x, and we want to say x is equal to 0, and we want to say if x equals expected length, then we want to say domain parts dot append domain string, and then after that we want to say domain string is equal to an empty string to get rid of all the old characters. And what we want to do is we want to say x plus equals 1, and let's just come down here and print domain parts. So you can see we get howCode printed out, but then we get this weird 3. So what we want to do is we want to just move this actually up here, and we want to just put it here, and then we want to say state equals 0. And then finally what we want to do is we want to say if byte equals 0, then we want to say domain parts dot append domain string. And up here what we want to do is reset x every time we reach the expected length. And then finally we want to break out of this whenever we get to the 0 character, which is the character that denotes the end of the string in Wireshark here. So let's just run this and let's just see what we get. We get a list, and we have howCode and org, and it's split up in 2 different items in the list, which is exactly what we wanted. So what we'll do is return domain parts by saying question type. And what we can do is create another variable, call it y, set it equal to 0. So now every time the for loop runs, we're going to increment y by 1. And if we go back to Wireshark, we can see that after the domain name, the next 2 bytes are the type of the query. So therefore, if we come down here, we can say that question type is equal to data. And whenever we get down to this part, y is going to be equal to the index of, if we go back here, this 0 character. So if we increment y by 1 and increment it by 1 again, we'll get the 2 bytes that make up the request type. So we can say data go from y plus 1 to y plus 3. So if we just print question type. Okay, so the reason we got this weird error is because we just need to take this out of the for loop. And you can see there we have 0001. And that's the question type. So that's it for this video. Don't forget to like, comment, favorite, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.